So I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are standing in a pitch black hallway.
Oh, setting the scene right away. I like it.
Yeah, we're jumping right in today. So it's exactly 2:14 in the morning. And outside, there is just this heavy, relentless rainstorm completely battering the windows.
Right, the kind of rain that sounds
So, yeah,
like thousands of tiny fingers drumming against the glass.
exactly. Just this deafening, isolating downpour. And you were standing there because your older brother, Daniel, died in a horrific car accident during a storm just like this one, only a few days ago.
Wow. Okay, so the trauma is incredibly fresh.
Oh, it's raw. And the trauma to his physical body in this accident was so severe that the family was forced to hold a strict, closed casket funeral.
Which is devastating. I mean, psychologically, the funeral director being adamant that no one is allowed to see the body, it disrupts the whole mourning process.
Right, because you need that visual closure, right?
Exactly. The mother at this funeral was entirely broken by that restriction. Like, in the narrative we're exploring today for this deep dive, which is called The Grief That Wears a Face,
Yeah.
her reaction isn't just sadness. It's like a structural collapse of her psyche.
Yeah, the text says she cries so hard she nearly collapses right into the mud by the grave.
Right. And for 3 days following that burial, the family home has just been trapped in that heavy, suffocating quiet. You know that quiet.
Oh, absolutely. The kind that only exists in a house of profound mourning, where the air literally feels thick.
Yeah, where the clocks tick just way too loudly. And everyone is just floating through the rooms, well, like ghosts themselves.
And here is where the absolute terror of this narrative takes root. The protagonist, who is Daniel's sibling, the person whose eyes we are looking through right now.
The ones standing in the dark hallway.
Yes, exactly. They're carrying this terrible, isolating secret because they didn't listen to the funeral director. Yeah, they write, "Nobody knew I secretly looked inside the casket before the funeral. They actually snuck into the viewing room when it was totally empty."
That is, I mean, you can understand the desperate need to do that, but the psychological risk is huge.
Well, the risk becomes a nightmare because what they saw inside that satin-lined box was not their brother.
Right. It wasn't just a badly injured body.
No, it was a faceless corpse. They describe it as just smooth, blank skin stretched incredibly tightly over bone, right where the features should be.
Like a mannequin.
Worse, like no eyes, no mouth, no nose, just this blank, horrifying canvas of flesh.
So they went in thinking the car accident had physically destroyed his face, but standing in that viewing room, they realized something fundamentally supernatural and far worse was happening.
Right, so put yourself back in their shoes. You are standing in this dark, silent hallway at 2 a.m., listening to the rain, with that horrifying image of a faceless corpse just burning in your mind.
Just completely paralyzed by that memory.
Yeah. And then out of nowhere, 3 slow, heavy knocks echo from the front door.
Oh, man. Just the cadence of those knocks is what shatters the silence.
Right, because it's not a frantic knocking, is it?
No, not at all. It isn't frantic pounding like
Yeah.
someone who's lost and seeking shelter from the storm. It is 3 slow, deliberate, incredibly patient strikes against the wood, and then just dead silence.
And before the protagonist can even move a muscle, the mother is out of her bedroom. Like, she just rushes past him in the dark, tears open the front door, and immediately starts screaming.
And this is the crucial part. She isn't screaming in terror. The sound that's literally tearing out of her throat is this shrill, unadulterated wail of absolute desperate joy.
Which is almost more chilling than if she were screaming in fear. Because standing outside on the porch, illuminated by that flickering yellow porch light and completely stoked by the pouring rain, is Daniel.
Right, or at least something wearing Daniel's shape.
Exactly. His clothes are black with water.
Right.
Freezing mud is just dripping from his shoes, pooling on the welcome mat. But his skin looks pale gray in the harsh light.
The text describes it as looking like wet paper, right?
Yes. Wet paper. And he is smiling.
Okay, so let's shift into the mother's perspective for a second to really understand this. Because for our deep dive today, to truly unpack the claustrophobia here, we need to get inside their heads.
Yeah, let's do it. What is she experiencing right there on the porch?
If I'm the mother, I am throwing my arms around this figure. I am burying my face in his freezing, mud-soaked chest, and I am crying uncontrollably.
You're completely ignoring the red flags.
Completely. I do not care that his skin is the color of ash. I don't care that he smells like rotting water and overturned earth. My entire reality was shattered by an unbearable grief 3 days ago, and now, miraculously, the universe has repaired it.
My son is home.
Exactly. My son is home. The impossible has happened, and my fierce, stubborn denial has been rewarded. That's her reality in that moment.
Which is terrifying, because if I am the protagonist, I am standing in the hallway right behind you, and my blood is literally turned to ice. My feet are bolted to the floorboards.
You're just watching this happen.
I'm watching it, and I cannot articulate the terror that is paralyzing my throat because I know what is actually in the ground.
Right, because you saw the coffin. You touched that smooth, faceless skin.
Yeah. I am watching my mother desperately embrace a dead, mimicking thing, and the entity knows that I know.
All this detail is so awful.
It really is, because as the mother is weeping into his shoulder, he doesn't wrap his arms around her. He just stands there, completely rigid, arms hanging loosely at his sides.
Like a puppet that isn't fully activated yet.
Yeah, exactly. And he is smiling too wide, like stretching his cheeks so far the protagonist can actually hear the skin pulling.
Ugh, that visceral auditory detail.
And he slowly looks directly over the mother's shoulder, locks dead eyes with the protagonist in the dark, and whispers a single phrase. Just one phrase. Like, "You saw the coffin."
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
It lays his cards on the table immediately.
Right. It isn't just a taunt.
No, it's a calculated immobilization.
Huh.
By whispering that specific phrase, the monster is neutralizing the only actual threat in the house.
Because it's acknowledging that the protagonist cannot be fooled.
Exactly. It's saying, I know you possess the truth.
Mm.
But simultaneously, it's declaring that it just doesn't matter. It's asserting total dominance. The entity is essentially saying, I know you see me. Now watch how utterly useless the truth is, because I already have your mother.
It's weaponizing the isolation of reality. The protagonist is instantly established as the only reliable anchor in a house that is just plummeting into madness.
While everyone else is operating on desperate, blinding hope.
The protagonist is operating on cold, hard, traumatic fact.
You know, we often talk about the physical sensations of acute grief. Like, many people experience sudden, breathless panic attacks in the middle of the night during the early stages of mourning.
Oh, definitely. Those 2 a.m. wake-ups where you just can't breathe.
Right, a violent jolting awake where the reality of the loss just crashes down on your chest like an anvil.
Yeah.
That 2:14 a.m. knock in the story operates on that exact same psychological frequency.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It's the external manifestation of an internal terror.
Yes. The shock is worn off, the unbearable reality is demanding to be felt, and it is physically intruding into the quiet house. But rather than enduring the panic attack, rather than processing the pain, the mother opens the door and literally embraces the avoidance of it.
And that decision dooms everyone. Because the physical horror of the wet paper entity on the porch is visceral, sure, but what happens when the sun comes up is just infinitely worse.
Because you'd think daylight would break the illusion.
Right. You expect the daylight to break the spell. You expect the mother to walk into the kitchen, see this gray, dripping thing sitting at the breakfast table, and finally scream in horror.
But she doesn't.
She doesn't. The next morning, she is frying eggs, she is pouring coffee. She treats her dead son's monstrous return as if he simply came home from a late shift at work.
The daylight reveals the true mechanics of the entity's infiltration, I think. It isn't relying on shadows or jump scares to hide itself.
No, it's hiding in plain sight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It relies entirely on the mother's impenetrable cognitive dissonance. Her denial is so absolute, so pathological at this point, that it functions as a localized reality distortion field.
I love that phrase, a reality distortion field.
The mother becomes the anchor. She provides the foothold the entity needs to survive in the daylight.
And from that anchor, the delusion acts like a contagion. It literally spreads outward into the community.
It doesn't just stay in the house.
No, the protagonist watches in absolute horror as the aunt visits and casually insists Daniel never died. She just says, oh, he was just sick for a while.
Wow. Just completely overwriting the funeral.
Yeah, and it gets wider. Neighbors wave at the entity from the sidewalk and claim they saw him mowing the lawn last week. Even his high school teachers forget his death and just mark him present in class.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
The entire community's collective memory is being retroactively overwritten.
How does that even happen, like psychologically?
Well, we really need to examine the psychological precedent for this. There's a documented psychiatric syndrome called folie à deux, or shared psychosis.
Oh, right, where two people share the same delusion.
Yes, a delusional belief is transmitted from a primary individual to another person, usually someone in close physical or emotional proximity.
So the mother is the primary host here.
Precisely. And think about human nature. People are inherently conflict averse, especially in the face of profound grief. When a grieving mother looks you directly in the eye and speaks with absolute unwavering certainty about a false reality, the social and psychological pressure to accept her reality is immense.
Because you don't want to be the one to say, hey, your son is dead.
Exactly. The entity exploits this human vulnerability. It doesn't have to use supernatural force to mind control the neighbors. It uses the terrifying force of the mother's grief. Once the neighbors accept the mother's lie just to avoid the awkwardness or the pain of confronting her, the entity slips in and permanently rewires their memory.
And the manipulation of memory becomes physical, too. It's
Yeah.
not just in their heads. The photographs on the walls of the family home begin to alter.
That part is so incredibly creepy.
It is. And this isn't a sudden magical flash where the pictures change instantly like in a movie. It is a creeping, agonizingly slow corruption of the physical record.
So slow you might think you're just imagining it at first.
Right. The protagonist starts noticing that in a family portrait taken like 5 years ago, Daniel's smile seems a fraction wider than it was yesterday.
Just a fraction.
Yeah. And then the next week, the ink seems to have bled and his eyes are staring in a slightly different direction.
Oh, I hate that.
It gets worse. In the newer photos, the ones taken right before the accident, his physical position in the frame is actually changing.
He's moving within the printed photos.
Yes, he is standing closer to the protagonist. He is leaning over them, watching them in the pictures.
You know, a photograph is supposed to be an objective, immutable capture of light and time. By corrupting the photographs, the entity is demonstrating that it isn't just occupying the present physical space of the house.
It's rewriting history.
It is extending its roots backward through time. It is consuming Daniel's history. It is erasing the real boy who existed and retroactively replacing him with this monstrous facsimile. If it can alter the physical evidence of the past, it destabilizes the protagonist's entire foundation of truth.
And if the days are bad, the nights are when the illusion really thins out. The protagonist lies awake just listening to the sounds of the house because the mother completely stops sleeping.
She doesn't sleep at all anymore.
Not a wink. She spends entire nights down in the pitch-black living room talking to Daniel, and the protagonist creeps to the top of the stairs and listens to them.
That is so tense.
And here's the detail that truly makes my skin crawl. Only Daniel's voice is ever speaking.
Wait, really? The mother is just silent.
Totally silent. The mother never says a single word. She just sits in the dark, smiling softly, while the thing wearing her dead son's face delivers uninterrupted, hours-long monologues.
Think about the physical reality of that scene from the mother's perspective. Like, I am sitting in an armchair in absolute darkness. I am wrapped in this suffocating blanket of denial. I am listening to a voice that perfectly mimics my son's cadence, his pitch, his laughter.
But it's just going on and on.
Right. But I am so desperate for the silence of those first 3 days to remain broken that I will ignore every screaming alarm bell in my primal brain. I will ignore the fact that the voice speaking to me hasn't paused to draw a breath in over an hour.
Oh, God. The lack of breathing.
I will ignore the wet, rotting smell filling the room. I will ignore the fact that the stories it is telling don't even make sense. I am actively choosing the nightmare over the empty grave.
Okay, let me challenge that interpretation for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Is she truly just a victim of her own trauma here, or is she consciously complicit? Because, I mean, sitting in the dark for 6 hours listening to a breathless, rotting thing speak, the human brain's pattern recognition is way too strong to miss that.
You think she knows exactly what it is?
I argue she knows. Deep down, beneath the layers of trauma, she knows exactly what is sitting across from her. She has made a deliberate Faustian bargain. She is fully aware it is a monster, but she prefers the monster to the agonizing reality of the empty chair at the dinner table.
That's a really dark reading, but it makes sense. The line between subconscious defense mechanism and conscious complicity blurs entirely in extreme trauma.
Right, like she has to know.
She may not verbally acknowledge it as a monster, but her physical behavior, the refusal to sleep, the sitting in the dark rather than turning on a light to look at it, suggests she knows the illusion cannot withstand scrutiny.
She's protecting the lie.
Exactly. She is carefully curating the environment to protect the delusion. And by doing so, she is actively feeding the entity. Her complicity is what allows the infection to spread from her mind into the physical architecture of the house itself.
Which brings us to the sensory decay, because the environment itself begins to rot, mirroring the unexpressed grief that's just festering inside the family.
The physical house starts breaking down.
Yeah, and the smell becomes overpowering. The protagonist describes the entire house smelling like rotting water, stagnant algae, and wet earth. A constant, inescapable scent of an open grave after a heavy rain.
Smell is deeply tied to the amygdala, which is the part of the brain responsible for processing emotion and survival instincts.
Right, our lizard brain.
Yeah. Smelling an open grave inside your own kitchen triggers a reptilian brain panic. It's the body's ultimate warning system screaming that the environment is contaminated by death.
But the mother just ignores it.
She hums right through it, entirely unbothered, while the protagonist is literally gagging on the scent of their own suppressed trauma. The unmourned death is quite literally leaking into the air they breathe.
And then the nocturnal sounds escalate because the entity stops pretending to walk normally when the mother isn't around.
It drops the act.
It totally drops it. The protagonist hears it moving through the house at 3 a.m., but it is dragging itself. Wet, heavy crawling sounds echo from inside the walls.
Inside the walls.
Yes. And there is the sound of massive, strained breathing rattling the metal of the air conditioning vents.
The physical house is acting as an extension of the monster's biology at this point. When you suppress profound emotional pain, when you bury it alive like the mother has done, it doesn't just stay buried quietly.
It ferments.
It festers, it becomes toxic. It leaks out into every aspect of your life, destroying your foundations. We see this metaphor become terrifyingly literal when the protagonist notices dark, foul-smelling water constantly seeping from beneath Daniel's bedroom door, staining the hallway carpet.
Which leads to one of the most chilling scenes. The protagonist wakes up one night to find the entity standing right in their bedroom doorway.
Just watching them.
It isn't moving. It is just a silhouette in the dark, watching them sleep. And then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, the entity's head tilts sideways, and the protagonist hears the distinct wet crunch of bones softly cracking beneath the skin, as if the neck is snapping itself just to achieve the angle.
Because it's not a real human body.
Exactly. And then it speaks. It says, "Mom misses me." But it isn't just Daniel's voice anymore.
Oh, this is where the audio design of this nightmare really peaks.
Right. It is two voices speaking in perfect overlapping unison. Daniel's voice, and underneath it, a deeper, cavernous, vibrating voice that sounds like grinding stones, adding, "You should miss me too."
That dual voice is a critical escalation. The mask is slipping, but only for the one person who already knows the truth.
It doesn't do that around the mother.
No, never. The entity is demanding participation from the protagonist. It feeds on being missed. It metabolizes mourning. The mother's grief provides a feast, sure, but the protagonist's stubborn grip on reality, their refusal to surrender to the sorrow, acts as a starvation mechanism.
So it's actively targeting them now.
The monster isn't just haunting the protagonist, it is actively trying to break their psychological resistance so it can consume their grief as well.
And the protagonist tries to resist. They lock their bedroom door every single night, but every morning they wake up to find it standing wide open.
There is no physical safety left in that house.
None at all. Pushed to the absolute edge of their sanity, the protagonist decides they have to know what is happening inside Daniel's room, the source of the leak.
The epicenter of the infection.
Yeah, so they follow the trail of dark water leaking onto the carpet, they grip the brass doorknob, and they push the door open.
And what do they see? Because the room shouldn't be normal.
It isn't. The room is completely devoid of furniture. The bed, the desk, the posters, everything that made it a teenager's room is completely gone. But the room is not empty.
Okay, let's go back into character for this. Walk me through opening that door.
Okay, so I push the door open. The smell of wet earth and copper hits the back of my throat so hard my eyes water instantly. The floor is covered in an inch of black water. I look at the walls, and the floral wallpaper is undulating.
Moving like a liquid.
Yeah, moving like the surface of a disturbed lake. Something enormous is dragging its bulk in a slow circle behind the plaster.
Behind the plaza.
And then the faces emerge. Dozens of human faces begin pushing outward from inside the walls, stretching the vintage wallpaper until it becomes translucent like bruised skin.
Just trapped souls.
They're opening their mouths in silent, agonizing screams. And right there, trapped among these anonymous, shifting shapes, I see him. I see Daniel's real face.
Oh, that is heartbreaking.
Not the wet paper monster. My actual brother. He looks terrified. His eyes are darting wildly. He locks eyes with me, and his lips violently mouth two words over and over. Not me.
He's warning you.
Yes. But before my brain can even process the horror that my brother's actual soul is bound inside this wallpaper purgatory, cold, soaking wet fingers burst upward through the floorboards, wrapping around my ankles, violently trying to drag me down into the water.
And if I am the mother in this scenario, I hear the splashing, the frantic scrambling, your breathless, terror-stricken screams as you kick free and barely drag yourself out into the hallway.
You come out to help me, right?
I step out of my bedroom. I look at you, collapsed on the floor, hyperventilating, staring at the leaking door. I do not run to you. I do not ask if you are hurt.
Because you're gone.
I simply tilt my head to the side, and slowly, the corners of my mouth stretch upward. It is Daniel's smile, the wide, impossible, bone-cracking smile of the entity.
That identical smile is the exact moment the protagonist realizes the horrific scope of the infection. The entity isn't just a parasite wearing Daniel's face anymore, it is a systemic virus.
It has claimed the mother entirely.
Yes. The mother's coping mechanism was to shut down her emotional immune system and actively welcome the virus inside. She believed she was protecting her family by accepting this resurrection, but she has actively facilitated the destruction of the host structure from the inside out.
It forces us to confront the true nature of this entity. The appearance of the real Daniel's face trapped in the wall is just a devastating revelation.
Because he's not at peace.
Exactly. The monster doesn't just impersonate the dead, it consumes their essence. The real Daniel is trapped in a state of eternal suffering, bound within the literal architecture of this entity, while a mocking facsimile wears his skin to manipulate and devour his grieving family.
With the house fully infected and the mother completely assimilated, the entity no longer needs to rely solely on the mask of Daniel to break the protagonist.
It can use everything now.
It has permeated the very environment, and it begins to exploit every single emotional vulnerability the protagonist possesses. Which brings us to the closet scene.
Oh, this scene. It is an absolute masterclass in psychological torture.
The haunting shifts from atmospheric dread into a deliberate, calculated siege. It begins with a sudden, total power outage. Every light in the house shuts off simultaneously.
Plunging them into total darkness.
Plunged into pitch darkness, the protagonist hears those wet, dragging sounds again. But they aren't coming from the walls anymore. They are moving directly across the ceiling above their bedroom.
Getting closer.
The plaster begins to bulge downward heavily. Dust and chips of paint fall onto the bed. The wood of the ceiling joists groans under a massive, shifting weight. The text explicitly describes the sound of too many limbs scraping against the drywall overhead.
Too many limbs. That phrase alone is a nightmare.
And then a sound cuts through the dark. Daniel is laughing, but the laughter isn't coming from the hallway outside the door. It is echoing from inside the hollow space of the ceiling itself.
The architecture of the home has completely surrendered at this point. The house is no longer a shelter. It is the digestive tract of the beast. The boundary between the physical structure and the supernatural entity has dissolved.
And the voices outside the protagonist's bedroom door reveal the extent of the community's corruption. Because it isn't just the entity speaking anymore.
Who else is there?
The protagonist hears their mother, their aunt, the neighbors, an entire crowd of people standing outside the bedroom door. And they're all speaking together in perfect, monotonous unison, using Daniel's voice. Why won't you remember us correctly? And sometimes the dead don't come back alone.
Why won't you remember us correctly? That is literal psychological warfare.
It's gaslighting on a supernatural scale.
Exactly. It is the collective weight of the infected community's delusion trying to crush the protagonist's grip on objective reality. The entity is turning the protagonist's sanity into a crime.
Blaming them for the horror.
It is blaming them for the disharmony, suggesting that if they would just surrender their memory, if they would just give in, the pain would stop.
The gaslighting is so intense and the physical threat is so overwhelming that the protagonist does the only thing a terrified human animal can do. They retreat into the smallest, darkest space available.
They hide.
They run into the bedroom closet, pull the slatted wooden door shut, lock it, and crouch on the floor in the dark, trembling violently, trying to muffle the sound of their own breathing.
But the entity is patient. It doesn't smash the closet door down.
No, it doesn't need to.
It follows them, its heavy mass dragging across the floor, and stops right outside the slats. It begins to scratch gently at the wood, and Daniel's voice whispers through the cracks, sounding hurt and incredibly innocent. "You didn't hug me when I came home."
Oh, weaponizing sibling guilt.
Completely. It is trying to make the protagonist feel like a monster for rejecting a monster.
But the guilt trip isn't working fast enough. The protagonist is just holding their hands over their ears, so the entity adapts. It pulls out its most devastating weapon. The scratching stops. A new voice joins Daniel from the darkness outside the closet. The father's voice.
Who died years ago, right?
The father died when they were 7 years old. They haven't heard his voice in over a decade. But speaking through the slats of the closet door, he sounds exactly the same.
Let's act this out, because the cruelty of this is staggering. I am standing on the other side of that thin wooden door. You are inside, hyperventilating in the dark.
I'm just waiting for you to break the door down.
But I do not yell. I do not threaten. I speak to you in the exact cadence of the man who used to check under your bed for monsters when you were a child. My tone is warm. It is deeply, profoundly safe. There is no monstrous echo beneath my words. I just say, softly and calmly, open the door. We missed you.
If I am crouched in that closet, I am instantly destroyed. My resolve completely shatters.
Because it's everything you want.
Because how unimaginably tempting is that? To stop fighting this terrifying, isolating reality. To turn the knob, open the door, and just let the warm delusion wash over me.
It's offering an escape from the pain.
The entity isn't offering terror here. It is offering the one thing I've craved since I was 7 years old, the absolute safety of my father. It is using my own deep-seated desire for comfort as a crowbar to pry open my sanity.
The manipulation is breathtakingly cruel, and it escalates even further. The text describes a chorus of voices joining the father. Dozens of voices speaking softly together beyond the closet door.
All the dead.
Dead relatives, childhood friends who passed away, neighbors buried years ago. Every person the protagonist has ever loved and lost, all speaking in a gentle, pleading harmony. Let us inside your memory.
The physical pressure against the closet becomes immense at this point. The door bulges inward violently, the wood splintering as if something massive and fluid is pressing its entire weight against it.
The structure is failing.
The protagonist hears wet, ragged breathing merely inches away from their face. And then the lock snaps and the door slowly creaks open by itself.
And what's inside?
Inside the darkness of the bedroom, hundreds of faces are shifting and churning beneath each other like a single mass of living flesh. Daniel's face screams briefly as it cycles to the surface. The father's face appears, crying silently. And then the entity, speaking with all of their voices simultaneously, whispers its most chilling realization. Grief makes beautiful doors.
Oh man, we need to unpack the sheer devastating weight of that metaphor. Grief makes beautiful doors. What the entity is explicitly revealing is the biological mechanism of its infiltration.
It's telling us exactly how it got in.
Yes. The human experience of sorrow leaves us cracked wide open. In our desperate, agonizing longing to feel close to a lost loved one, we construct these beautiful, fragile doors of nostalgia, memory, and yearning.
You want to keep them close.
We intend to use these doors to send our love out into the void to keep the memory alive. But a door swings both ways.
Right.
By refusing to let the dead rest, by leaving that passageway unlocked in our minds, we unknowingly provide an entrance for something ancient, hungry, and opportunistic to walk right in.
Which brings up a crucial debate about the nature of this monster. Like, is this entity just a mindless, instinctual parasite feeding blindly on sorrow like a tick feeds on blood? Or is it angry?
That's the big question.
Because the tactics it deploys in this hallway, the targeted gaslighting, the perfect recreation of the father's protective tone, the sheer psychological torture, it feels undeniably cruel. It feels like the entity is actively punishing the protagonist for maintaining their grip on reality.
It feels personal.
Exactly. Is it furious that the protagonist refuses to blindly surrender like the mother did?
Calling it mindless dismisses the complexity of its hunt, I think. I argue it possesses a profound predatory intelligence.
Like a hunter.
Yes. In nature, certain parasites manipulate the neurochemistry of their hosts to ensure their own survival, like cordyceps fungi that force insects to climb to high altitudes before bursting from their heads to spread spores.
Oh, nature's horrifying.
It is. And the entity operates similarly, but on a psychological level. The protagonist's stubborn adherence to reality is an active immune response threatening the entity's total consumption of the household.
So it has to neutralize the threat.
Right. The cruelty isn't necessarily emotional anger. It is an aggressive, calculated neutralization tactic.
Yeah.
It is harvesting the family's collective unconscious, analyzing the data, and deploying precise psychological strikes to break down the final resisting cell. It demands total assimilation.
And the protagonist refuses to be assimilated. They make a break for it. They scramble out of the closet, dodge that shifting mass of faces in the dark, and make a final desperate run downstairs toward the front door.
Trying to just get out of the house.
But they quickly realize that the house they grew up in no longer exists. They have entered the belly of the beast.
The physical environment has completely warped, mirroring the internal corruption of the family's minds. As the protagonist runs, the architecture actually defies physics.
It's not a normal house anymore.
No. The hallways stretch unnaturally far, plunging into darkness. Doors appear where there used to be solid walls. This spatial disorientation is a brilliant physical manifestation of what deep, unmoored grief feels like.
You're just totally lost.
Exactly. You are lost in an environment you thought you knew, unable to find an exit.
And standing inside every single one of these impossible doorways is someone dead.
Just waiting.
They're just standing there, watching the protagonist sprint past. Some are smiling that wide, unnatural smile. Some are crying tears of black water. Some are softly begging the protagonist to stop running and join them.
A gauntlet of ghosts.
It's a terrifying gauntlet, but the protagonist ignores them, focused only on the front door, until they hear a sound drifting up from the kitchen that freezes the blood in their veins.
What is it?
Their mother is singing. It's a soft, gentle lullaby she used to sing when Daniel and the protagonist were little children terrified of thunderstorms.
Oh, that is so haunting. The protagonist is drawn to the sound, stepping into the kitchen, and the tableau waiting for them there is the ultimate, grotesque perversion of domestic comfort.
It's a dinner party.
It is a morbid, crowded dinner party.
The kitchen is packed. The mother sits at the head of the dinner table, smiling peacefully, her eyes completely glazed over, just humming her lullaby.
Like she's in a trance.
And sitting in the chairs around her, standing against the counters, crowded into the corners of the room, are dozens of people, all dead.
A whole community of the lost.
Family members the protagonist only recognizes from sepia-tone photographs. Neighbors who died of old age a decade ago. Strangers with rotting faces and clothes from different centuries. And sitting directly across from the mother at the center of the table is Daniel.
But the figure sitting in that chair can no longer pass for human.
The mask is completely gone.
The facade has degraded entirely. The text describes Daniel's body as being fundamentally wrong. He is too tall for the chair. His spine bows at a sharp, broken angle.
Ugh, the body horror here is intense.
It is. His arms rest on the table, but the elbows bend backward, jointed like a dog's hind legs.
And the smile stretches so far backward that it tears past his cheekbones, exposing the raw musculature of his jaw.
It's not even a face anymore.
The dead guests all stop moving. They turn their heads in perfect, synchronized unison to stare at the protagonist. They all smile, that exact same torn smile.
They're all part of the same organism.
And then Daniel stands up. The sound of his bones cracking and rearranging echoes like gunshots in the kitchen. As his torn mouth opens unnaturally wide, the protagonist sees that underneath his flesh, there are more mouths.
Oh my God.
Dozens of mouths moving independently beneath the skin of his throat and chest, whispering, hungry, grinding their teeth. The entire room, every dead guest, begs softly, "Sit with us."
This dinner party is the horrific climax of the narrative's core theme. The dinner table is universally recognized as the heart of the family, the place of gathering, sustenance, and the sharing of history.
It's where you come together.
By placing the climax here, the narrative illustrates that the entity has consumed not just the individuals, but the entire lineage and history of the community. It is a devastating visualization of the fact that refusing to mourn, desperately accepting the dead back into your life, does not resurrect them.
It just feeds the monster.
It only grants a primordial force permission to consume the living.
Which triggers the final, terrible epiphany for the protagonist. They back away from the table, bumping into the kitchen wall. But the wall doesn't feel like drywall.
What does it feel like?
It feels warm. It gives slightly under their hand, like breathing flesh. The walls around the kitchen begin swelling outward. The protagonist looks closely and sees human shapes, faces, hands, torsos pressing tightly against the wallpaper from the inside, trapped in a viscous fluid.
The house itself is alive.
Yes. It wasn't invaded by the monster. It has become the monster. It is an architecture built entirely from collective grief. It feeds on mourning. Every single person who ever opened their beautiful doors of sorrow, who accepted the dead back inside, was dissolved and became a physical part of these living, breathing walls.
Consider the biology of a pitcher plant.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
It's a beautiful, alluring trap found in nature. It secretes a sweet, intoxicating nectar around its rim to attract insects. The prey is drawn in by the sweetness, seeking sustenance and comfort.
Just like the mother sought comfort.
Exactly. But the inside of the plant is lined with slick, downward-pointing hairs, and at the bottom is a pool of digestive enzymes. Once you step inside to drink the nectar, you cannot crawl out.
You're trapped.
You fall into the belly, and the plant slowly dissolves you, absorbing your nutrients to grow larger. The mother drank the sweet nectar of delusion at 2:14 a.m. on the porch. She sought the comfort of her son's face. And now, her entire family, her neighbors, her reality, are being slowly dissolved into the walls of this massive psychological picture plane.
And the final imagery cements that complete inescapable consumption. As the impossible towering figure of Daniel steps away from the table and moves toward the protagonist, the skin around his face finally gives
It
way.
completely rips.
It tears open completely, splitting from the forehead down to the sternum.
And beneath that tearing wet paper skin, there is no human face at all.
There is only a void, a cavernous darkness filled with hundreds of moving teeth, shifting bone, and the endless overlapping, deafening sound of whispering voices.
The dead dinner guests smile wider, their own faces beginning to tear at the seams. And the mother who initiated this entire apocalypse with her joyful scream on the porch, she watches her son's face rip open to reveal a maw of grinding teeth.
Well, what does she do?
She doesn't flinch. She delivers her final devastating line of total submission. She sits there among the rotting dead, smiles warmly at the monster, and whispers calmly, "He brought everyone home."
Wow. It is the ultimate tragedy. She views this mass consumption, this horrific amalgamation of trapped souls writhing in the walls, as a successful family reunion.
Her delusion is absolute.
She has surrendered her mind so completely to the parasite that she literally welcomes the digestion. And then the lights go out. The kitchen is plunged into total darkness.
And the story just ends there.
The story ends not with a jump scare, but with the suffocating sound of every dead voice the protagonist had ever loved calling their name together in the dark, just waiting for them to finally sit down at the table.
The isolation of the protagonist in that final, terrifying moment is profound. They are the last bastion of reality in a world entirely consumed by a lie.
They are totally alone.
They are surrounded by the simulated voices of everyone they ever loved, all working in tandem to pull them down into the belly of the delusion.
It highlights the central tragedy that makes The Grief That Wears a Face so much more than just a haunted house story. The mother's refusal to mourn properly, her absolute inability to accept the finality of the faceless corpse in the ground, doomed not just herself but her living child, her extended family, and her entire community.
It is a dark, urgent, cautionary tale about the destructive power of denial. It forces the reader to confront a profoundly uncomfortable truth about human emotion. Mourning is an agonizing process. It is a heavy, dark storm that you simply have to stand in until it passes.
You can't avoid the rain.
You can't. It hurts, it leaves scars, but it is necessary for survival. Seeking a monstrous comfort in denial, building a fortress of delusion to avoid the reality of the grave, is infinitely more dangerous. The shifting perspectives we explored today highlight how terrifying and isolating it is to hold on to the truth when everyone else around you chooses the warmth of a collective lie.
It's always going to be easier to smile at the dinner table with ghosts than to stare at an empty chair. The empty chair demands that you actually feel the pain of absence. But as this narrative so brutally illustrates, the dead remember every door that grief leaves open.
That is the lingering lesson. Unresolved grief isn't just sadness, it is an active, open invitation.
And that leaves us with something incredibly unsettling to think about long after you turn this off. Look at your own life. Look at the losses you carry, the memories you refuse to let go of, the pain you've buried rather than processed.
You all have them.
We do. When we refuse to accept our own losses, when we desperately hold on to the past and refuse to let the dead rest, what kind of invisible monsters are we silently inviting to sit at our own dinner tables? You might think you are just keeping a memory alive, but you have to ask yourself, who is actually doing the knocking at 2:14 in the morning?